Well, good morning, everyone. Last night at 6:35, we received the biggest threat we've ever received from our closest friends and ally, from President-elect Trump, that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico. We do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found them insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. Spent a lot of time in the U.S., and I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians. We see drugs flow from Mexico coming up through California, in through BC, into Alberta, into Ontario, and what we need to do is take that threat seriously. I had a conversation with the Prime Minister after he spoke to President-elect Trump last night. The threat is serious. We need to do better on our borders. We need to give the resources to CBSA, which are fine people. And I know, talking to other premiers last night, that we will do everything we can as provincial governments and territorial governments to secure our borders. There's over 2.1 million Mexicans and other nationalities coming across the southern border. Compared to Canada, it's over 197 million, which is unacceptable. When it comes to drugs, 1 ounce of any illegal drug is 1 ounce too many going back and forth across the border. 1 illegal going across the border back and forth is 1 too many illegals. We've experienced, for instance, Roxham Road, over 35,000 illegals coming up through the American border on just 1 illegal border crossing. We need to do everything we can to tighten up our borders, to strengthen our borders. And a message to President-elect Trump: there's no closer ally, there's no other country in the world that has stood shoulder to shoulder with our American counterparts, our friends, our family. It's an insult to the 900,000 Americans that are living here in Canada. It's an insult to the 9 million Americans that wake up every single morning to produce products to ship up to Ontario alone. We hear the message loud and clear. The Prime Minister confirmed today that we're going to have a First Minister's meeting tomorrow at 5 p.m. We need to make sure that he has a strong plan to protect and secure our borders and make sure we address the threat from the U.S. But again, we're the closest allies and friends the Americans have. I'm proud to stand in front of our flags of Canada and the U.S. I'll always be proud. I'll be proud to call thousands of Americans and millions of Americans our closest allies. And just a reminder to the American people, yes, it will hurt Canada, yes, it will hurt Ontario, but it will hurt Americans. It will hurt their economy when 9 million Americans don't wake up to produce products for Ontario and Canada. And we want to work together. We are stronger together. At the end of the day, there's no two closer allies, more of an open border than Canada and the U.S. And I want to emphasize, to compare us to Mexico is the most insulting thing I've ever heard from our friends and closest allies, the United States of America. We want to work together, we will work together, and we'll resolve this problem.
Premier, do you want to? Would you think that Canada should retaliate in kind if President-elect Trump follows through with this threat? If he's not bluffing, and if he goes forward with a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods going into America, should all American goods be taxed at the same tariff?
Well, hopefully we won't come to that, but if it does, there is no choice. We have to retaliate. We have to retaliate, not against the Americans, the administration that has made a wrong call on this. It's very simple. And you ask any American, and I know thousands of Americans, and endless governors, and senators, and congressmen and women, if they feel Canada is a threat. The answer is no. Can we do a better job? Do we need to do a better job on our borders? 1,000%. But we know that when it comes to illegal drugs, our police services across the country, federally, provincially, municipally, work with the ATF, the DEA, in making sure that we stop the flow of drugs coming back and forth across the border.
Premier, have you tried to speak to President-elect Trump, or do you desire to try and speak to President-elect Trump directly?
I have not talked to President-elect Trump or anyone in their administration outside of the governors that have come up here and the senators and the congressmen and women that I've talked to numerous times over the last year. We want a close relationship, but we do have to listen to the threat of too many illegals coming across the border. But there's illegal guns, there's illegal drugs, there's illegals coming across our border, and those guns are being used on heinous crimes coming in from the U.S. So we have to squash the illegal drugs, illegal guns, and the illegals coming across the U.S. into Canada.
Tom Holman, the incoming border czar, has said Canada can't be a backdoor entryway to the U.S. When you look at the 82% rise that the Border Protection Service has seen over the last couple of years, to take it to about 198,000 illegals going in, it coincides with our rise in temporary foreign workers, international students. Do you think that system is being abused by people just looking to get into the U.S.?
Well, I think there's abuse on both sides. I agree 100%. We have to tighten up our borders on both sides. We have illegals coming in from America into Canada as well. We have to work together. You don't go after each other when we have a serious problem. It's like a family member, and they are a family member. The millions of people that travel down to the U.S., not only to vacation, but to do business. And the millions of Americans that come up to do business day in and day out. We love our American friends, and they love us. And this is no way to treat your closest ally. In saying that, we do have a problem. We need to address that problem. And that's what we're going to be talking to the Prime Minister about, the plan on how to secure our borders as well.
When it comes to the auto sector, though, I mean, Mexico, U.S., and Canada are so integrated. The car has to travel across the border 8 times before it's produced. Are you worried that Ontario's competitiveness when it comes to cheaper vehicles is at risk here if you cut out Mexico?
Well, they're so intertwined, as you say, Colin, and it'd be very hard to stop that supply chain. It's very similar that 60% of their energy in the U.S., the 4 million barrels of oil that we ship down to the U.S. to keep their economy going, the energy that flows into New York State and New England to keep their lights on day in and day out. Our energy grid here in Ontario can send energy down to Florida. And it wasn't too long ago, just a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, when they had a natural disaster in North Carolina. Guess who came to the rescue to support our American friends? We had hydro trucks loaded up going down to North Carolina to get their electricity grid back online. That's what friends do. That's what allies do. They don't turn their back on each other. And we have sent crews down there when they had natural disasters numerous times. We're always there to support our American allies and friends.
Are you falling into the same divide and conquer tactics?
I'm sorry.
What would our economy look like with a 25% share? What would it do?
Well, it would not be good. It wouldn't be good for the Americans either. 1 in 5 jobs rely on American trade back and forth between the borders. Our critical minerals that we have, they need our critical minerals. They need our nickel. They need our lithium and all the other critical minerals. Cobalt. They're in desperate need of cobalt. They need it for their military. They need it to produce products. And they aren't going to make a deal with China. China has 90% of the nickel cornered around the world, but they don't have Ontario's nickel cornered. And the Americans need our critical minerals like they need our energy. And what better friend to support each other than Canada and the U.S. I hope we can come up with a solution to support both sides of the border, work collaboratively in cooperation with the new administration and I'm confident we will.
Aren't you falling for the same divide and conquer tactic that President Trump used the last time, like 6 years ago? He wanted to do a bilateral agreement with Mexico until Mexico insisted that Canada be part of it. Isn't it kind of, I don't know, a bit of a dick move to throw Mexico under the bus and say it's insulting to be even compared to them?
Oh, it's not insulting at all. You can't compare Mexico to Canada. You know, you go anywhere in Mexico, you have 2.1 million illegals crossing the border. It's an open border, and hopefully they'll close that border. The drugs are flowing in 24 times the amount of what's flowing in across the Canadian to the American border. In saying that, as I mentioned earlier, 1 ounce of illegal drugs and 1 illegal coming across the border is one too many.
But is the president manipulating you?
Sorry.
It seems pretty obvious that President Trump is using the threat of tariffs not as an economic policy, but to get an outcome. He wants the border addressed. Do you believe that the federal government has the willingness to act on that as opposed to just starting the fight with the Americans?
Well, I hope they do, and that's why I've requested a meeting as soon as possible. The Prime Minister confirmed this morning the meeting will take place tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we look forward to hearing from the federal government and their plan. You cannot ignore the threat that we received last night at 6:35 p.m. It's the biggest threat we've ever seen, in as far as we're concerned, in decades, more than decades. I can never remember a threat from a U.S. administration like we received today. It's unfortunate. It's very, very hurtful to Canadians and Americans on both sides, because I know Americans love Canada. They love the people in Canada, and we love our American counterparts, and we need to straighten this out, but not ignore the threat. They obviously see a problem, not as large as the problem we see down in Mexico, and that's why I've called on the federal government to do a bilateral trade deal with the U.S. and do a separate bilateral trade deal with Mexico. As I mentioned the other day, Mexico two-way trade with Ontario is $40 billion. We import $36.5 billion, and we import $36.5 billion and export $3.5 billion. That's not fair trade, anything but fair trade. So we need to tighten up the trade deals with Mexico as well. Compared to the U.S., $500 billion of two-way trade, pretty well split right down the center. In the 17 states that were their #1 export destination, as I say, 17 states call Ontario and Canada their #1 customer. That will affect those 17 states. It's going to affect the 11 other states that call Canada and Ontario their #2 largest trading partner in the world. That will affect Americans and Canadians.
Premier, just to clarify your position here, are you officially saying that Ontario wants to see the end of CUSMA and just bilateral trade deals, or should this be one of the options, either the North American Free Trade Agreement or bilateral trade deals with the U.S. and Mexico?
Well, if they came forward, which isn't going to happen, if they came forward and say, let's just re-sign the exact same deal, let's get the deal done, in my opinion. But if they want to start reviewing the deal and making cuts, well, we need to do a bilateral trade deal with the U.S. and a separate one with Mexico.
Was the Prime Minister open to that?
Premier, speaking of those states that we do a lot of trade with, you've built a lot of relationships with governors over the years. Are you going to be talking to them as well, asking them to appeal to Trump to back down on this?
We are going to do a full-out campaign. Not only full-out campaign, we've had a really strong commercial put together that we're going to be sending down to the U.S., to all jurisdictions in the U.S., talking about how we are stronger together and weaker when we're apart. Again, those critical minerals go to the U.S. military. Every conflict they've had, we stand shoulder to shoulder, putting our Canadian soldiers' lives at risk, because that's what you do. When a family member is in an argument or a fight around the world, you stand beside them, you support them. So this is a shock that came to us last night at 6:30, and we're going to address that shock, but we do have to address the problem on our border as well, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we understand their concerns, address their concerns, and make sure that we have a strong economic tie. Because if all heck breaks loose around the world, which hopefully it never will, who do we turn to and who do they turn to? They turn to Canada for the support, and we turn to them for support. It's a mutually rewarding relationship on both sides of the border.
We don't have that
That was the last
relationship with
question. Thank
Mexico.
you.
Thank you so much, everyone.